So just finding the posture that's best for you. Closing your eyes. And just taking some long, slow, deeper breaths. As you just receive the sound of the one note. That calls you to turn within, let go, and come home. Feeling the welcome that each inhale is. Being welcomed deeper into your body. Just receiving the holding of the chair and the floor. Welcomes you exactly as you are. Letting each exhale be a melting, letting the tasks and activities and conversations of the day melt into the past. Scanning through your body to see if any tension can melt. And just feeling the tiny muscles around your face and your eyes soften. See if the following of thoughts can melt. Just letting go. Just being drawn into the very core of your being. As if there's a luminous golden magnet deep in your heart. That draws all the disparate parts effortlessly to this luminous core. Sense and feel that golden magnet is not just in your heart, but all the way through your central body. As if there's a luminous, magnetic backbone that grounds you nourishes you. Where you are connected to every resource and the supreme truth of all that is. So as we merge into the mantra Om Namah Shivaya, feel that golden magnet at the very core of you, going all the way through your whole being. Just naturally being drawn back to what and who really is. And all the grace in existence. Welcome to semester 4 of our Marin Sangha. I want to open up a subject, not just tonight, but for this remaining chunk of our year together, on a subject that I think is really important and going to really serve us with whatever is happening next in our time as we head into the winter. And the subject is finding our very deepest center. So I want to begin by reading a passage that I've adapted from the Radiant Sutras. And I might have to put my glasses on for this. That space is bad. This space is good. The ride is rough, or the going is smooth. We are thrown into suffering. We are thrown into joy. Beloved one, find the space in the center, the shimmering spaciousness that encompasses all opposites. Here the essences of creation are at play. Earth, water, fire, air, and space, and the senses that perceive them. Rest in the center and find your ground. In order to ride the waves of these intense times we're in, and to be graceful in and amidst it all, we really need to engage everything we know, all that we've been learning so far, all our deepest insights in our inquiry, the grace and the clarity that comes in our meditation or in our moments of spontaneous ego relaxation, to truly abide, to really stay close to home, and to actually deepen in our capacity to abide in the very center of our being. And of course, we've been seeing so far that the more we allow relaxation out of our personality, out of our opinions, the more we let our defenses and our fears and our concerns to melt, the more we find an emptying out happens, a natural surrender happens out of our self-centeredness, our fears, our concerns, our reactivity. And in that spaciousness, grace emerges, a luminosity kind of finds us, and we recognize that it's not other than our deepest nature. The spaciousness, the emptiness, and the luminosity that brings alive all of the essential qualities that we need, the strength, the clarity, the wisdom, the love, the peace, is possible even though we're in such intense times. In my morning meditation today, I was just sitting and spontaneously something arose that I just hadn't even thought of before that I wanted to share with you. It just popped in about how Ramana Maharshi, Sri Aurobindo, Yogananda, some really serious heavyweight spiritual giants, let's call them, were living in another time of immense intensity and chaos in the world. And I found it interesting that at that time when they were all together on the planet in a particular pocket of the world, radiating a depth of grace and clarity and wisdom and spiritual nobility that we've all benefited from, whether through reading their books when we were younger or through some of the presence and teachings of Ramana that trickle through me to you, or whatever you might have encountered so far in your own way, that was happening amongst a backdrop of the Second World War, which was a pretty intense, dark, cathartic time all over the world, and in which many people sort of thought the end of days were near and that we might not survive it. But also, in addition to that, in India itself, it was a time of immense political, cultural, societal upheaval and violence. It was a time of partition. And I don't think it's a coincidence that there were these serious spiritual giants who were alive and on the planet and actually kind of kind of connecting with one another in interesting ways at that time. And so, it was a time we forget about it because, it wasn't our generation, but, that time in India after the British, were leaving around 1947, the years leading up to that, after another great spiritual giant, Mahatma Gandhi, had managed through his beauty and dignity and power and strength and extraordinary integrity, had shone such a light that was so powerful and peaceful that in this time of partition, where India was being divided up into the Muslim parts and the far east, northeast, and west, Pakistan became Pakistan and Bangalore, and there was this huge mass migration, the likes that the world had never seen before. Millions of Muslims were traveling, to what is now Pakistan and Bangalore, trying to get out of the predominantly Hindu areas and the reverse. And many, many souls never made it because there was such explosions of violence, sectarian violence, and rape and devastation, massacre, gangs, really awful things that in that day were intense and painful and seemed really, really dark, immense suffering. And so amidst this turmoil, two great saints actually met. In fact, Yogananda traveled south to meet Ramana Maharshi. It's a pretty interesting story. This was 1947, and I was looking it up today. So one of the questions that Yogananda, who was younger, asked Ramana at the time was a question that you, I'm sure, have thought about or felt perhaps, and that was this: why does God permit such suffering in the world? Should he not, with his omnipotence, just do away with it in one stroke and ordain universal realization of God consciousness? You thought that too, right? And Ramana responded this way. He said, suffering is often the motivating force for the realization of God. And Yogananda objected, but should he not just ordain it differently? Ramana just said, it is the way. Yogananda says, well then, are yoga and practices antidotes to this suffering? Ramana says, yes, they help you to overcome suffering. Yogananda persisted, but why should there be suffering? And Ramana actually pushed him back on himself and said, who suffers? Who suffers? Because, one way you could interpret this is that, Ramana essentially was inviting Yogananda to go deeper, to not object to what was, even though on an emotional level, on a human level, it's very objectionable, as these times that we're in might feel very objectionable on many levels to us. And of course, sometimes difficult emotions arise, reactions arrive, we feel a lot of things. It's not wrong, it's not unspiritual, it's part of the journey, it's part of the ride of it all. But I think Ramana was pointing to something really important that I think is very important for us too, is that we really only can effectively tackle and the challenges that we face that are immense on many levels, not just the pandemic and the challenges of that as we're dealing with and will be dealing with for a while on so many levels of our life, and the knock-on challenges and suffering and difficulties that creates for us and for so many. Not only the difficulty of the political turmoil and the craziness and the swings and roundabout and the hoopla and the hyperbole and all of it, and the division and the polarization that is painful and difficult some days more than others. And, obviously we've all been dealing with the kind of, I think, close encounter with the fires in our own way. And I think all of us here, certainly if you're living in California, you can't not be feeling concerns about the future in terms of climate change and what that might mean for our lives and for what we're going to have to face. It's pretty obvious that, the situation that we're in is really knocking on our door in a deep way spiritually, that there's a very profound divine invitation that is here for us collectively to evolve, and to evolve so that we can truly cooperate with one another in a way that we haven't managed to do before, where we can find the bridge across our different perspectives and feelings and values, and really find a common humanity that truly is needed for our very survival on so many levels. And so that's a powerful question that I think we're all sitting with in our own way, even if you haven't been necessarily framing it in these words, is, will we make it? Can we make it? And of course that brings us right back to you. Will you make it? Will you put the effort in? Will you go deeper? Will you not just sort of focus on, what's difficult out there, the world that you'd like to see change, but will you be the change? Will you come to an even deeper center inside of yourself so as to access the noble qualities of our deepest nature that are needed in order to be able to stay calm here in these times and also be a benefit? It's big time, and I think what Ramana was suggesting to Yogananda was to not put so much focus on objecting to what was, but rather take a deeper seat inside, to really come into who we really are, deeper than our personality, because that's where we need to go in order to handle what's here and to bring forth our very, very best. It's easy to hear that invitation, Ramana or somebody saying who suffers, and dismiss it, think that that's dismissing our humanity or viewing the need to take real action in the world. It's not actually. And if you look at Ramana's embodiment and example, you see so many examples of him inviting, some of his devotees, asking them personally, where is your family? Are they Hindu? Are they in the north? Are you sure they're safe? If you're not, get on the next train and go take care of them right now. Being very practical in ways that are very human and loving and of service and, just obvious, really. But in order to stay close to something that could actually help us to serve the evolution of our world in a new way, to somehow stay optimistic in all of this, to somehow trust even in all of this, to play whatever small part we can play in breaking down divisiveness, in rising to our highest nature rather than descending into more enactment of our instinctual impulses. We need all help we can get. And the good news is that according to all the great mystics of the traditions, there's so much help available to us when we're sincere. And so if you study the biographies of, great souls from all the traditions, if you read the biographies of, Tibetan masters or lamas, if you read Christian mystics, if you read the writings of the Sufi mystics, you start to see a pattern. What most of them actually talk about when they're speaking of their own internal life are encounters with realms of grace. They're talking about encounters with bodhisattva realms, with rays of light, with angelic forces, and they're talking about being given a teaching or some kind of healing or something that is transformative being delivered to them that helps them to live more deeply in this life. And so it's easy to dismiss very deep esoteric things like that as highfalutin stuff that isn't very practical, but it's paradoxically the opposite is true. That grace is very real. It's not a thing, but it's a word that really represents, divine forces, forces that are hard even for our mind to understand, but which permeate and infuse and penetrate our consciousness and help us to evolve, help us to refine, help us to live in the two worlds simultaneously. And so to be a benefit and to share some of that grace here in this realm that surely needs it. And interestingly, I have heard Hamid Ali, founder of the Diamond Approach, be asked a question about the state of our world a couple of different occasions on retreats. And on both occasions, he has said the same thing, which is said that the world is really in the care of divine forces, unseen forces, and because of that, somehow we will get through it. And so, as spiritual people in a Sangha that is about living grace, I want to open that up a little bit more tonight, both in terms of how this could help you deepen and find a deeper center inside of yourself, and how we can apply that to things that are difficult, that are activating for us, that challenge us, our little macro and micro traumas. So I've been thinking about giving this teaching to you for a while, but I've hesitated because I'm very respectful of the fact that, some of you even here in this group are therapists and experts in the field of trauma, and I'm not. But I did stumble upon a way of working with trauma in 3 decades ago, actually, when I was doing a lot of one-on-one work with people that weren't necessarily coming from a faith tradition, or they weren't necessarily steeped in deep spiritual practice, as you've had the opportunity to be by now. They were just people who were suffering and who needed help. And one of the things that I discovered way back then in my late 20s was that not only does spiritual practice sort of help us to find calm and to find resources, but that as we open to deeper dimensions of grace, as we open to divine forces that are here with us, helping us when we're sincere and willing, responding to us when we ask for help, coming to the foreground of our experience when we allow space, when we relax a little bit and open a little bit and find us from the inside, bubble up like that living spring, bringing back online illuminated qualities and love and healing, is that when grace comes alive, it creates a very purifying, healing effect in our consciousness. So we all know that in our early childhood, we receive impressions that are difficult and sometimes traumatizing. That a parent says something really cutting or is mean, or there's an experience we go through that's very overwhelming and scary to us, and it feels like the support we need isn't there, or it's just too overwhelming and too unmanageable. That would qualify as a trauma. And I know you know from your own experience how when we go through difficult experiences that are scary, overwhelming, are too much for our little nervous system to handle, and we feel that the support is not there, which is what I believe quantifies it as trauma, going through difficult suffering and feeling that what we need isn't available to us. We just freeze. We leave ourselves, or we freeze in some way. And so that creates an impression in our soul where there's that activation of fight or flight, there's an activation of pain and suffering, there's an activation of the felt sense of no support and the terror of that. There is decision made in our mind of what we must do, but we're stuck in it. It's frozen, it becomes fixated. And those become deep grooves in our soul that get activated by various situations. Well, I'm sure you've probably seen or experienced that in these times we're in that are very intense, it has a tendency to activate whatever undigested traumas that we have that haven't yet been fully liberated. And of course, that's natural given the fact that all the external supports, the things that we've all been used to being able to rely on the outside aren't there as much. We're all being thrown back on ourselves a little bit more. We can't, just necessarily go and meet up with our friends in a group in the way we used to. We can't meet in person in Sangha. We have to do it this way. We're all having to deal with getting activated, and just the field of the collective is really activating. We hear about violence, we hear about wildfires. It activates that, the threat for our survival. And I think that's partly why we're seeing, so much sort of very painful human behavior and extremism and, hate. It's part of what these sort of very uncertain times breed as a way for egos to offset the shakiness, the internal shakiness of the instability that these unstable times are provoking. So that's why I want to bring you this sort of way of just considering how to work with what's getting activated in you in all of this, and really learning how to apply some of these teachings that I've been giving you on grace and some of the practices that we've been working with, more specifically towards these junctures in your soul where there's fixatedness or frozenness or particular spots that are really challenging for you. So one of the things I learned many years ago was that the good news is that, grace, when it comes alive, when we experience divine presence, when we experience the truth of real love, when we experience just the immense beauty and goodness and clarity and truth and peace that is ontological, that is our foundation, when it comes alive within us, it creates a deeper impression, a healing impression. It has a enlightening, purifying, cleansing effect on the fabric of our consciousness, and it helps to allow these knots and stuck parts to thaw out in a way that I haven't seen anything else quite do as effectively. It makes sense, really, because if we bring the force that is ontological, that is deeper, that is real, that is bigger than any issue or concern or trauma or suffering or hurt, that is more powerful and loving than anything, it makes sense that it would have a healing effect upon us. So I discovered many years ago, as I was working with people who'd gone through, really scary, difficult things, that were creating a repeating pattern in their life, I would ask them first to tell me about an experience they'd had in their life of unconditional love and acceptance. So why I would ask that question is I wanted to see what is their reference point, what is their natural, direct experience of the pure realms of grace. Although I wouldn't use that language because I knew it wouldn't mean anything. So I just say, what's the deepest experience you've ever had of a moment of unconditional love or pure acceptance? And often their first response would say, I've never experienced that before. And I would say, well, maybe you didn't experience that from your mother or father or your family in the way you hoped. But dig a little deeper. Have you experienced that perhaps through a pet, or the kindness of a neighbor or teacher, or through the way you felt in a particular place in nature where you felt it was so accepting and spacious and you naturally felt peaceful? So I would get them to focus on that experience for a moment and to work with it in the similar way that you often work with things in the looping part of an inquiry question. Remember, I give you often the invitation, what's it like in body, heart, mind when you probably notice part of my formula by now. Well, what I'm really doing is I'm giving you the invitation to keep exploring your experience when the gates have opened, when the obstacle isn't there, when you actually experience the grace in the particular way we're exploring that in the theme we're working with. So the what's it like has you go deeper, notice how it is somatically in your body, notice how it feels in your heart, notice how things look, what the awareness is when you experience, for example, you feel the presence of real love or acceptance. So I would get them to just stay with that, and they would try to tell me other things. No, I'd stay with that in the same way that we do with one another. The whole point of the repeating question is it's the cheat's way of cultivating one-pointed concentration. So you don't wiggle off into story. You stay going further and deeper in that focus of experience. You don't distract yourself. So I would do that with these people, and then I'd say, okay, just imagine that we're turning the volume dial of that experience. We're turning it way up, and I'd take them up from 1 to 10. So, and I get them really letting themselves to feel, letting that get stronger and deeper and more sustained. And then when their experience was of loving presence is here, acceptance is here, I would say, now, with that here with you, let's go and take a look at this difficult memory, at this difficult past experience. But we're doing it from the perspective of now having access to the love and the support that you actually need in order to be with that. So it was incredible what would happen with people. It really taught me a lot and was very formative in part of some of the work that I now do with you and some of the work that we do in the healing chair. And it taught me that, when we connect to our deeper center, when we take the time to nurture and nourish the the fact of the presence and the love and the clarity and the support that is always here underneath our personality, underneath our memories. It's always available. When we take the time to nurture that, it gives us a whole other level of resource to learn to stay present and open-hearted and to open towards our suffering, our experiences, all parts of ourself. And of course, that's what allows them to integrate. That's what allows suffering to be transformed into wisdom, which is the point of suffering. I believe it's not just God's being vindictive. It is a powerful motivator, and it is designed to help us break down our density, help it to evolve us, help to humanize us, help us to truly find out what's ultimately real, to let everything come home. So I then started to go further with that and started to see, well, if sometimes, these sort of stuck points aren't necessarily just ours, and you've experienced that, I'm sure. We've done lines of inquiry together, particularly the classical inquiry we've done, and that's in the book, on fear, where we name a fear, something that scares us, and then we go towards that fear and we explore who does it belong to. So if you really investigate the places where you're contracted, the places where you get reactive, often what you find is it's not just your own trauma, not just your own suffering. It is connected to the suffering of our people. Now, we hear the term ancestral trauma, and it's a very real thing. And spiritually, it's even there in the Bible. The sins of the father will be carried on to the fourth generation. And we experience that whatever our ancestors weren't able to integrate, of course, affects what we receive, what comes into us from them. But once you start truly taking seriously the spiritual understanding that, that we're not separate and that we're not limited to our body, and when you start going deep enough to see that that not only being here in the now starts to dissolve past and future, it also starts to break down the concept of time. So I'm sure in your inquiry, maybe you've felt things and you've gone deep enough to see this isn't just my fear, it's my father's fear, or it's my grandfather's fear, or it's my, you know, my mother's lineage's fear, or we see that it's more than just us. And so I found in doing my own inner work in these places where I have discovered a lineage of a stuck point, a lineage of a freeze, a trauma pattern that is actually affecting me, was affecting my capacity to really sit in my deepest nature and to be free and to know my wholeness, was to start asking deeper questions about that, to, open to the spiritual resources that are here, whether through, calling forth the deepest memory you've ever had of the pure realms of pure love, of pure acceptance, or by firstly starting in one of the meditation practices that I've given you, or other practices that you might have learned over the years that really help you contact that purity that is absolutely clear and clean. To not just go to yourself, but to ask, oh, where did this glitch begin? Where did this habit really start? So I've asked myself questions like, is this, I can usually feel it, oh, it's mother's or it's father's line. And I've asked myself, okay, how many generations does this go back? And was it a male or a female ancestor? And so just start asking these questions. And it's amazing, what comes. And so what I've worked with in myself, played with in myself, is not only, not only sort of feeling that, okay, I'm opening into my deepest center and I'm learning to open towards that kind of fear or stress pattern or in moment of terror or insecurity or shame or whatever it was that was so painful, but also recognizing that my ancestors are in me as they're in yours or in you, and that as we do that work, we do it for our ancestors. And in the same way that they're inside us, we're inside them. So this is a concept that, again, Hamid calls omnipresence. It's a layer down from non-duality where we're not only in the now, but the now includes all times and places. So that's always been a very accessible truth for me in my own interiority. And so I've taken to, in moments where I've discovered something isn't just, my own suffering or my own pattern, that it belongs to, an ancestor 4 generations back, I can ask, what happened, and even though I don't know historically, that's not really the point. It's sort of asking to be shown, where this originated, who it was that was knocked so far out of their natural condition that it created something unwholesome, frozen, dysfunctional, difficult, some suffering pattern throughout those generations. So I've sort of felt myself in that ancestor, inviting that ancestor to come back to their deepest center, as if I'm sitting inside of them, as if I'm sitting inside of them saying, remember this too. Let this purity flood through the system so that together we can open towards that experience that was so difficult and painful and overwhelming and traumatizing, but with love and support here, so that we're not alone. And I found that to be very profound in helping to iron out some of the most difficult knots of my own ancestral suffering. And I shared that in my work with others and have found that to be, they found that to be very powerful too. And then we can just sort of let that clear, pure, wholesome, centered presence radiate through forward, in the forward motion, through the generations that came after. So for example, if it was an ancestor 4 generations ago, letting the wholeness of being able to go through difficulties with resource and with love, with grace, to let that wholesome energy come down to the next generation and into the next generation and into your parents' generations and into you and out through you to whoever comes after you and into all of us. So, for me, what's really helped is that all these years of spiritual practice and deep meditation have created a deep magnet in my core that makes this pretty possible. So that's why I gave you a little hint today as we began the meditation of just sensing, feeling, seeing that there's a golden magnet right in the core of you. Maybe you didn't know about it, but it's there. And if you imagine that radiant golden magnet is just the gold of primordial pure being, the gold of supreme being, the gold of what always is and what always has been, the gold that is the source of everything, the gold that is real and true. And if you feel it, sense it, think of it as if it's a magnet and it's inside of you and it's always been inside of you, then just in the same way that a magnet will draw the iron shavings to itself effortlessly, if we put our focus on it, we let that just happen, we can just keep our focus there and just sense and feel being magnetized back to our deepest center. Some people like to think of that magnet, who are visual, to think of that magnet as then becoming like a great big pole that goes right through you, from your feet all the way up through your center line, up through your crown, connecting you to the very source of the earth, the very source of all matter and space, but that it's luminous and golden. Many mystics have spoken of truth itself, supreme being, as like a metallic gold. And that's how I see and sense and feel it too. But it's powerful. It's prior to impression. It has the capacity to allow the distorted impressions, the suffering impressions, to melt away. And that is why Ramana was saying to Yogananda, who suffers? Because when we come to this place, there's not a sufferer anymore. There's not a separate self who's split apart from the source. There is soul, there is individual being, but it's not separate, it's not apart, and therefore it's not suffering. So this is really the hope for humanity, and it's also the means for our healing and our evolution. It's the means for us to stay present and optimistic even in these times. And of course that empowers us to just be naturally wise and skillful and take right action without it being a big deal, without us having to polarize just taking the action that is true and right. When we're aligned with deep truth, our way of being becomes truthful. We see deception cleanly for what it is, suffering and distortion, and it does not negatively affect what is golden always, what is untainted and unshakable and always pure. And so as we take a deeper seat in that, we not only feel our wholeness, but we also feel our freedom. We feel our peace. We feel our natural love and compassion for everyone. We understand that painful, difficult, ugly behavior is just human ignorance and distortion, and it's suffering. And we don't hate the suffering. We understand it, but we don't feed it. We don't contribute further to it. We keep our attention on what is golden and what is ultimately redemptive for us all, what is healing and helpful. It helps us to get through. But it's also a service, because as we take a deeper seat, not only do we connect more substantially with what we need, with the resilience and the resources that can get us through tough times and actually help us to evolve and thrive in surprising ways that we might not have thought were possible. But it's also an act of service. Every time you sincerely come to sit and choose to rest in God, to return to your deeper center, is an act of service. And it can be an even deeper act of service if you actually not only dedicate it to the benefit of all, but you actually invite the world in, as if you're saying to all things and all beings, come and rest with me. Let's come back to the gold of truth at our core together. This is something that you see in A Course in Miracles in one of my very favorite lessons, which is the lesson, I rest in God. So I'm going to read it to you, and I want to highlight or reread a particular part of it that I think is extremely powerful, that's speaking to this. I might have to put my glasses on again for this. In God, you have no cares and no concerns, no burdens, no anxiety, no pain, no fear of future, and no past regrets. In timelessness you rest, while time goes by without its touch on you, for your rest can never change in any way. Each time you rest in God, a tired mind is suddenly made glad. A bird with broken wings begins to sing. A stream long dry begins to flow again. The world is born again each time you rest. And remember, you came to radiate this peace into the world, that it might rest along with you. As you rest today, call upon your brothers and sisters to rest along with you. Forget no one, inviting everyone into the boundless circle of peace, the holy sanctuary. Open the temple doors and let them come, from far across the world and near as well. Bid everyone welcome and let them rest here. We invite even those unborn and even those who have passed away to rest in the infinite unchanging ocean of peace. I rest in God. So you see, not only that exquisite passage is a transmission, an invitation, all of itself, which I've recorded, by the way, with beautiful music behind it. It's I Rest in God in the sanctuary of my website. But it's also very explicit in this invitation that you taking your rest, you coming back to the gold, the primordial purity and luminous truth at your core, has an effect. And that it is an invitation, and especially when you bring that quality of attention to it, when you realize you are calling everyone in, you are inviting everyone into their deepest center as you take up your seat, as you come back to the who you really are, that is deeper than the sufferer. When you call forth, it says here, open the temple's doors and let them come from far across the world, even those unborn and even those who have passed away. So you see, it's in there, this understanding of timelessness and omnipresence, where illumination and healing and deep transformation from unnecessary density can happen, even beyond the body and beyond form and beyond our conceptual understanding. So remember how powerful it is what we do here, and how powerful it is when you remember that you can call on help. You can call on forces of grace even though you don't understand them. You can ask for help and support from beings you might not even know about, but that you may feel in a moment. You can call up the memories of your direct experience, of the reality of such things, the moments you might have had in inquiry, where there has been a spontaneous arising of grace, bubbling up from your own experience. You wouldn't still be here in Sangha if that hadn't happened at least once or twice. And it can happen a lot stronger and freer and fuller. There's no end to it. There's no end to the love and the goodness and the support that's here for us if we're willing and open, and especially if we ask.